And so let's go right into our topic here, which, as it's been titled, is John Paul II a saint? Oh, all right. This is one of those topics that I, like to say. It's like, have you stopped beating your wife? You're going to be damned if you say yes and damned if you say no. It's just like the nature of the beast, let's say. Let's ask the question first, because it begs the question, why would somebody even, question whether John Paul II is a saint? And that would invariably have to go back to what he did in his pontificate. And some of the things there are not very good. So in the mind of any intelligent person, these things are going to raise questions like, okay, I understood a saint to be someone who is not only going to go to heaven, but is an exemplar par excellence of the Christian life and faith, who above everyone else who's going to go to heaven showed a life that just is by far and away above the average, Christian saint, because we can all call, those of us that are Catholic saints. The Bible calls us saints in the generic sense, you see, because if you're a baptized member of the church and you obey the laws of the church and there's no mortal sin on your soul, you are a saint in the biblical sense of the term, okay? But in the Catholic faith, we have a understanding of saint from tradition wherein you're not only a generic saint, you are a saint in the sense that we know you're in heaven, and the reason we know is because certain miracles have been performed. Your life stuck out like nobody's business. People recognized it, and they promoted you, and they went to you for advice, and you had miracles in your life, and you were just an exception to the average, and I hate to say, average run-of-the-mill Christian, because, hey, to be a Christian, it's tough. All right, so there's no average run-of-the-mill Christians in that sense, but you're above the average, okay? There's Christians out there who live an excellent life. They obey the Lord. They work 9 to 5. They raise their kids. They go to Mass. They do the sacraments. They love their neighbor as themselves. They do all the things, but, nobody notices except maybe their families. And that's where the book closes on their life, okay? Then there are other people that go way above that. And these are the people that we normally understood as saints worthy to be canonized by the church, where the church would say, okay, this person sticks out, and we are going to honor this person for that. I watch football. I like football. I used to play football. You have 50, 60 players on a team, but there are certain players that stick out, who are, you pay them the millions, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to come play for your team because they're better than the average Joe. And their names are in lights, and they get most of the money and the adulation and, the perks and all this kind of stuff because they stick out. And this is true in any profession. There are, there's good lawyers, and there's, you've heard the expression, get yourself a good lawyer. Well, what's a good lawyer? The guy that wins most of the cases, whether he's good, bad, or indifferent, he's the guy that you want on your side. You don't want a schlep for a lawyer if you're going to shell out all this money. Okay, so here, in the case of the legal stuff, you want the best. You want to go to a mediocre doctor when you're going to get heart surgery? Do you want to go to a good doctor? The one with a good reputation, the one that people adulate, the one that gets most of the heart surgeries because he's the go-to guy. So this is natural in life. It's not something abnormal where the church is going to raise someone up to high esteem, because we basically, the saints are like the Hollywood stars of Catholicism, so to speak. I hate to use that analogy, but you know, this is what the world's adulated people are. These are the Hollywood, stars, and among them, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of them, but there's only a few out there that rise to the level of, everybody knows who they are, their household name, and we even copy their lingo sometimes, and that's how familiar we are with them. So it's true in any kind of profession that normally you get adulation because you are an exemplar of your particular profession, whatever it is. Okay. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about saints in the Catholic Church. These are people that have been lived exceptional lives, okay, wherein they become the model of what it is to be a Christian. If you want to know what a Christian, go read and look at the life of Saint, Ignatius, or any saint. Okay. That's how we've normally thought of it. Okay. So if John Paul II does certain things in his pontificate that we look, wow, how could someone who's canonized a saint do those certain things or teach those certain things? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't go to heaven, but, if the whole tradition is holding up these people as examples par excellence of what it is to be a Christian, and they're going to be the model for your children or you, your friends, everybody, you want them to be, practically spotless. There's no question, there's no doubt, there's no suspicion that some kind of monkey business is going on with putting them into the saint category. And, this has been our tradition. So it's not like, we're creating something new here. It's the way we've done things. Okay. So that's the whole thing with, that starts the question with John Paul II. And if you've watched me for any length of time, I have taken a much more judgmental stance against John Paul II than you will normally find in your Catholic circles. And that's because I studied John Paul II probably more than I have any other pope. And every time I do, I come out the other end with even more suspicions and doubt and you name it. Okay, so if you want the devil's advocate side of the story, you come to me. Okay, if you want the flowery story about John Paul II, this is not the place you want to come. Go talk to somebody else. And it's not to say that there isn't some good stuff happening in John Paul II's pontificate. But what I find out there is that those people have a special devotion to John Paul II, a camaraderie with him unlike any other pope. And he had that kind of appeal. He had the perfect smile. He always said the perfect word at the right time. He reached out to people unlike many of the popes before him. So I understand what the appeal is. Okay. But as you know, appeals like that sometimes are skin deep, and you have to go searching a little bit to find out what made this man tick and what he was all about. And like I said, every time I do that, I do have a sour taste in my mouth. And look, I'm no judge, okay? But we have to judge these things to a certain extent because If we think somebody did was good, then we're going to model that behavior. And if what they did was actually sinful, then we're going to fall into sin ourselves. So in that sense, we have to judge people to even protect our own soul. Okay, because my conscience works overtime, believe me, in trying to find out what's right and what's not right, so that I can live a holy Christian life. And sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but I'm just not going to sweep things under the rug and tell my children, well, yeah, oh, this Pope did, there's nothing wrong here, nothing here to see. Whatever he did, you can model yourself by that behavior. I can't do that. I can do that with Pope, but I'm going to be judicious on what I allow my children to understand as good coming from, one Pope or another. And it's not just John Paul II. Okay. Yeah, we've had a number of popes in Catholic history that we look askance at because of the things they said, things they've done. So this is not like virgin ground here that we're breaking. Every century had one or two popes that, wow, it's like, where did you come from? And that's life on this earth. Okay, we're not going to get away from it. Let's just face it. Okay, that's what we're up to. So let's go through a couple of things, and then I'll try to answer the question directly. I never want to dodge a question. But like I said, it's like the question, have you stopped beating your wife? Whatever you say, you're going to get people that are going to get upset. But my job here is not to make people happy. It's to give them the truth. Okay. And God has given me certain gifts to see the truth. I may be wrong sometimes. I'm not infallible, of course. And I've said many times on this program, since we've been doing it over a year now, I give my opinion. You want my opinion? Come on this channel, and I will give you my opinion. You can take it, leave it, or throw it out, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to give you my opinion. Okay. And many people appreciate that. Okay. I have been around long enough and studied long enough to be able to answer some questions, I think, rather accurately. And I may be missing a few points here and there, but I generally get to the point, and here we are. So how can we start? What we should know about life is there is the legal life that we live, and then there is the true life. Okay, maybe that's the best way I think I can put it. Let's take a marriage, for example. Okay, there are many people out there that are married, and I'm not just talking about Christian marriages. I'm talking about everybody in the world. Okay, marriage is a legal contract with another person that you exchange vows with them, that you will be true to them no matter what, and in sickness and health, rich or poor, the whole formula. And you sign a paper. First of all, you get a license to get married. You have to get a license, so that makes it legal from the get-go. And then you have to be married you join together by a justice of the peace or a priest, minister, whatever, and somebody in authority who is vested with authority by the institution that they represent. That institution has been recognized legally by the majority of the people and put in authority. They designate that authority to the priest or judge or whatever, and he's the one that joins you. Okay, that's another legal aspect of marriage. If you okay, in being married, you're required to provide income for your family. That means you have to get a job. And if you don't take care of your children, the state will take your children away. If you abuse your wife, the state will take your wife away from you. So there are all kinds of legal restrictions you have in being married. Okay. And they usually come out in the open when you start abusing the marriage. If you want to get a divorce, you have to go through a legal process. You have to go before the judge. You have to get lawyers, and you have to bring evidence, which is also legal. It has to be credible evidence, and you may or may not get your divorce. Today, it's easy as drinking water, but you can show just irreconcilable differences. This is the extent of the marriages that are given divorce today. There's a lot of adultery going on, of course, and that ends up in divorce. But if you in the Catholic Church, if you want to get your marriage annulled, there's certain canonical, that's what we call it, canonical, instead of legal. Canonical process you have to go through. They can accept it or reject your plea of getting an annulment. Now, today, they allow it much more than they used to. But the fact is that there's a legal arrangement all the way around marriage. Okay. But so you can have two people that are legally married, but practically speaking, their marriage is a shambles. There are many such marriages, and that's why 60% of them, at least in the United States, end up in divorce. 60%. And then 60% of the second marriages end up in a divorce. Yeah, that's an interesting statistic. So while they're still legally married, they really don't have a marriage per se, because we think of marriage as two people loving each other, caring for each other, not cheating on one another, respecting each other, and taking care of the children and providing income, and all the things that have to work together to make what we would call a good marriage. Okay. But that begs the question, can you have a legal marriage, wherein the people really don't care about each other? And they're just sort of living out, their best options and waiting for the first chance to go. Yeah, there's a lot of them like that. Okay. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that there is a legal, what you would call position, and then there is the practical position. The legal position says, yeah, you're married. The practical says you have a good marriage. It's going to last. You love each other. Okay, so does the marriage make you love your spouse more? No, you loved your spouse before you got married. That's why you married her, or she married him, because you loved each other. And then you form the basis, that's the foundation of your marriage, and then you go get it recognized by the society. You get it legalized. And now it becomes not just a love relationship, it becomes a commitment. Okay, like a covenantal commitment where you're both bound now. Okay. But could you be bound without loving the person? You could, but it usually doesn't work that way. Usually, unless you have an arranged marriage, where you both get bound legally, and then you may start loving each other afterwards. I mean, that's possible. But in the West, we love first, and then we get married. And so what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that there is a legal position, and there is something that's very different than legal. It's like the Bible talking about the works of the law and faith. Why the big distinction? I mean, the whole New Testament's based on that. Do I have a relationship with God based on the law? Or do I have a relationship based on faith and works? Good works. Okay. Same thing I'm just talking about with marriage. Okay. The Jews, thought that they had an in with God because they were from Abraham and they got circumcised and they followed Moses and blah, 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 all this stuff. But they didn't love God. And how do we know that? Because they didn't obey God. They did their own thing. They loved keeping the law, putting burdens on themselves and making it look, feeling sorry for themselves. And, oh, well, how much we love you, God. They didn't really love him at all. Okay. Because, then they go out and commit adultery and steal from each other and, and all kinds of things after they did their little works, ceremonial works. Okay. So obviously they didn't love God. They didn't love their fellow man. But they had this law relationship with God, you see. They were legally tied somehow to him. And they were basing their whole relationship on that. Okay. So there you see the difference. Okay. God wants real, honest, loving, kind, obedient people for his people. He doesn't want law lovers. They love the law. They don't love God. Okay. So big, big, big difference. So in each institution, we have that. There's the legal framework that holds it together in the society. Okay. Like our Constitution. Of course, they abuse the Constitution, Republicans and Democrats, depending on how they want to interpret it and what goals they have. Okay. But the legal framework is the Constitution. Okay. Without it, we wouldn't have a country. Okay. But that's illegal, but you can work around the Constitution. You can find loopholes in the Constitution to harm other people and call it legal, because the Constitution doesn't cover it, or the Constitution is vague or ambiguous here or there. And like abortion, that's where that came from, the right to privacy. Well, where does the Constitution talk about a right to privacy? Okay. So that was invented by the Supreme Court in 1973 to get around the Constitution. The Constitution is not going to cover this, so we'll make up some reason, make it look legal, and all for the purpose of getting around the previous abortion laws. And we'll change them, and we'll make it look legal. We'll make it look, like we're doing the right thing. So you see, there's ways you can be legal and yet avoid the legal when you have some ulterior motive that you want to accomplish. So again, we have this, and this goes throughout society. There's the legal, and then there's the real world, the real nuts and bolts of what holds it together. It's people with thinking personalities and hearts and, made in the image of God that compels us to act a certain way. The law is just like a guide. It should be just like a guide, but the real nuts and bolts of who we are is that we're made in the image of God and we treat each other that way accordingly, you see. So the same is true with canonization. Canonization comes from the word canonical. What's canonical? It's legal. Okay. So you can make someone legally a saint within the structure, the legal structure or canonical structure of the Catholic Church. Okay. But does that mean that because you've labeled them with this legal category that they indeed are in the practical sense? Okay, I'm using that word again, practical. The real world, okay, where we live and breathe, have they fulfilled that side of the equation? Okay, now that's a big question. And if you want to try to bridge that gap between what you legally label somebody and what they really are in substance in real life, here's one thing you do. You take away the devil's advocate that we used to have for canonizations. See, the devil's advocate's job And that's another legal position. The devil's advocate's job is a canonical position designated by the church, who's in authority, legal authority, for that person, the devil's advocate, to go into your life and to look into every nook and cranny that he can to see if he can find some dirt on you. That's basically what his job was when we had one. Okay. And we've had one since what? Since we've started to make saints in the Catholic Church in the first millennium. You can go look them all up. Saint so-and-so, Saint so-and-so. So a lot of our popes were sainted in the first millennium. And so you can see where it derived from. And there was a devil's advocate. And his job was to go in there and find dirt on you. And if they found enough dirt, or they found even suspicion of dirt, you were not going to be a candidate for canonization. Okay? Simple as that. Why? Well, as we said before, we want the saints that we canonize. Not to say that there's many more people in heaven than there are canonized saints. Let's first say that. Okay. There are probably millions and millions of Catholic saints in heaven who are just saints in the generic sense than there are canonized saints. Okay. In the Catholic Church. Why is that? Well, because we put a special meaning on the word saint above the generic. And we said, these people are exceptional Christians. They are exemplars. They are examples to us of how to live the Christian faith through all kinds of persecution or trouble or whatever. And these people stand out, you see. So, in order to get to that point, to be an exemplar, yes, the church has to hire a devil's advocate to go in there, and it's his job to find dirt on you. And he's not going to go advertise it and say, okay, we found this person did this, he did that, did the other thing. No, this is all secret in the church, so you don't have to worry about being exposed for who you truly are. They will investigate you until they are satisfied, and sometimes these things can go on for years. You know, because it's like the prosecuting attorney, man. It's his job to go in there and find whatever dirt he can on you, because he wants to make you look as bad as possible, even outside of the supposed crime that you committed. You'll get friends that you used to know 20 years ago. I mean, look at what Kavanaugh went through. They went back to his high school years to try to smear him with dirt so that he would not be nominated as or not be accepted as a Supreme Court justice. Okay. So this is the devil's advocate's job. But if you want to separate the legal from the real world, the real practical world, yeah, well, let's just get the devil's advocate out of there. Yeah. And why? Well, because the definition of a saint was really changed to become someone who was just a good person. And they even considered some Protestants to be saints in John Paul's pontificate, because the definition of the saint had been diluted away from someone who was a exceptional Christian to someone who was just sort of lived the Christian life and probably went to heaven, and let's leave it at that, So in taking the devil's advocate away, the definition of a saint was basically changed to everything from the average run-of-the-mill Christian to an exceptional saint, and maybe a lot in between. Okay. And it was John Paul II that did that, took away the devil's advocate. That was a monumental departure from tradition. I just can't say it strong enough. I mean, it just totally changed. Once you do that, you just change the definition of saint. So it's not surprising that John Paul II canonized more saints in his pontificate, 26-year pontificate, than all the popes before him combined. Okay. If that doesn't say something, I don't know what does. Okay. Again, as I said, it changes the definition of what a saint is. Okay. And I'm sure he would have done more. And so this is where he departed from tradition. So that's one thing. All right. And if you further want to bridge the gap between the legally labeling someone a saint and the real world, you would lessen the other criterion or other criteria. And that one of those areas would be the miracles that were required. Okay. And not only the miracles, the number of miracles that were required, but the type of miracle that's required. Let me illustrate that for you. So I think it was, as far as I understand, it was at least 3 legitimate bona fide miracles that were required to even consider someone a canonized saint. And the other thing I need to say too is these exemplars, these exceptional people that have been so designated by the church, are now people that can be prayed to for divine favor. Okay, that's very important. And the basic reason, of course, is because the church has confirmed that this person went to heaven. And in order to pray in the Catholic understanding, the communion of saints, for spiritual favors on earth, you need to know that that person's in heaven. And so you pray to them, and if it's God's will, then he will work through them to answer your prayer. But the point is, you can pray to them once they've been canonized. So this is another thing that's really important to consider. And, when you look at John Paul II's whole way that he judged certain people, like I mentioned yesterday, Father Maciel, who was the head of the Legionnaires of Christ. This man had been raping people for decades. His students, he had, I forget how many wives he had, how many illegitimate children he had. And this guy was best friends with John Paul II. And even when John Paul II was told about Father Maciel, and by the way, Benedict XVI finally cleared it up. As soon as he got into office, he had Maciel defrocked in, because he saw the evidence. It was so obvious that you really have to be blind not to see it. But John Paul II didn't see it. He didn't see it in this guy, which makes me wonder, what is he using to judge canonizations by? If he can't even determine that he has a snake in the grass and knows this guy and is his best friend, and he has no inkling whatsoever what a devil he is, then what criterion is he using to judge the people that he's canonizing? There's no criteria, hardly. Okay, so that brings another thing into question. But what you would do to lessen the distance between the legal label and the real world is you would take away the requirement for miracles, or you would just make it nominal. Let's do 1 miracle. Okay, just 1, as opposed to 3. And then the one that's chosen, well, I know a lot of these histories of the miracle that's chosen, and usually it's some internal malady that the person has that we don't understand the nature of it to begin with, or don't understand it too well, and suddenly they're cured. And we take this and we say, oh, well, that's because this person prayed to John Paul II and um, um, was cured. And the reason I bring this up is because not only are the number of miracles lessened from 3 to 1, and some people say 4 to 2, but I have yet to confirm that. But irregardless, it's the same kind of dilution of the miracles. But the type of miracle, okay, you check the saints from yesteryear. You know, these people were raising people from the dead. They were, speaking in tongues, or they had some kind of other extraordinary, miraculous cure that could be verified. Okay, the one that was used for John Paul II was some lady who had Parkinson's disease, and I know my father was a doctor. I know all about this kind of stuff. They hardly know what Parkinson's disease is. They know it causes some kind of nervous condition, but the origin of it, the etiology of it, they really don't know. And it comes and goes. It just, you without warning. One day it'll be there and totally debilitate somebody, and the next day it's gone, and I don't even know why it's gone. And it's probably because of their diet, or they had some, trauma in their life or whatever, but it's very sketchy as to the origin and the dissipation of that disease. But yet this is the one that supposedly was used for John Paul II to make him a saint. Okay. And of course he had no devil's advocate because he had already gotten rid of the devil's advocate. All right. So it's almost like somebody is setting this up. And it's amazing, because who's the one who's canonizing them? Well, that would be Pope Francis. Not only does he canonize John Paul II, but he canonizes Paul VI and John the 23rd. And both of these popes have some very suspicious areas of their life. Not that, you have to be sinless to be a saint, but that you're going to be an exemplar, an exceptional Christian, to be a model for all the other Christians that are going to come after you. Okay. And what's also interesting is the 3 popes of the so-called new springtime of the church, bang, 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 are made saints. And yet the church has gone through some of the most tumultuous, unorthodox, immoral time period in the latter half of the 20th century than it's ever gone through. Now, I study church history, and yes, there are some bad popes back there, some bad times. And our later 20th century ranks up right there with them, believe me. Whether you're talking about the anti-popes, we've had, depending on who your source is, you can have between 30 and 40 of those. You had the Borgia popes, you had the Formosa pope. You had in the beginning, you had Liberius, and he was a little sketchy. And almost in every century, you can find some bad people. And our 20th century ranks right up there with them. Because why? We're the only time in church history that has had this homosexual pedophile scandal to the proportions that have never before been seen in the church. Never. When you have statistics showing that half of your priesthood and a third of your bishopric is dallying in these 2 sins, and promoting it like Francis does, although indirectly, he promotes it and allows it. You've got one of the worst periods in history, and yet this very Pope is the one that canonized three popes in succession: John the 23rd, Paul the 6th, and John Paul II, excluding John Paul I, because he was only around for 33 days. So now you look at the source of the canonizations, Pope Francis, who I don't think has said one thing correctly in his entire pontificate, and that's being nice, for the last, almost 8 years now. And almost everything that comes out of his mouth it's like, where did you come from? Then you begin to wonder again. And you have a right to wonder. Okay? Because anything that doesn't pass muster with your conscience, you have the right to wonder. And then when you compare the fact that in less than 50 years, we've had 3 popes canonized, and in all of the second millennium, from say 1000 to 2000, we have had, let's say, not up to 2000, because we have to include the last 3 popes that got canonized, but prior to, let's go to the 1900s. I'm sorry, the end of the 1800s. From 1000 to 1800, let's say. Now we'll have to include Pius X, so we'll go to the early 1900s. There's been 3 popes that have been sainted, possibly 4. I may have my number wrong. Somebody told me I had to add another one in there, and I forget where I started. It either was a 1200 or 1000. That may be the discrepancy. But at any rate, you can count them on your hand. Okay, in 1,000 years or around there, we've had that many popes canonized. But in the 20th century, when we've had the worst scandals the church has ever had, we have 3 popes in succession sainted by a person, Pope Francis, who some people aren't even sure is the Pope, and everything that comes out of his mouth is either heresy or diluting our Christian faith. So you see the dilemma we're in. Okay. While we're at it, let's go through some of the things that a devil's advocate would have had a heyday with John Paul II. All right. We talked last night about the Assisi scandal. A total of 7 times, 2 major ones, did he have Assisi meetings that brought in the pagans of the world to pray for something as mundane as world peace. Well, maybe that's I'll give him some credit there. Maybe he didn't want to pray up for other things, but somehow they were allowed to pray for world peace. Okay, and that's after, of course, he had failed in his consecration of Russia that he was supposed to have done. That would have given him the world peace. At least that's what he was thinking, that it would give him world peace if he had done the consecration of Russia, but he didn't get it. So the next thing to do, let's call the pagans of the world. And we'll do that right up to the tail end of my pontificate, because he had the last one in 2002. Now, this is just a blatant disregard of the first commandment. There have been many people who have tried to soft-soap this, okay? And all they do is expose who they really are. That's what happens. And it dovetails with his whole understanding of salvation, because many times, even before he was Pope, Redemptor Hominis is one of them. There was another encyclical he wrote in 1995, and there are a few others where John Paul, if he doesn't come right out and say it, implies that there's universal salvation. Now, I'm not going to say that he taught universal salvation, but he came darn close. And he was the one that gave the red hat to von Balthasar in the late 80s, who wrote the book, Dare We Hope That All Men Be Saved. As if there's some legitimacy to making a rhetorical question out of it. As if, the majority of men are going to be saved. when the Bible is just crystal clear that that's not the case. And our church history is crystal clear. So, yeah, there was something brewing. And so, well, what the heck? We can call pagans. I mean, if everybody's going to be saved, even pagans have a relationship with God, and they can pray to their false gods for something that heaven didn't give me with my, Fatima consecration. I mean, when you start to unravel this thing, it's just... And who's doing the same thing today? Pope Francis. Yeah, the similarities between John Paul II and Pope Francis they're amazing when you look at them. Francis just took in Pachamama, and basically they were worshiping Pachamama or praying to Pachamama, or whatever they were doing with him. He shouldn't have been in there in the first place. This pagan god from the so-called Amazonian rite, whatever that's going to legitimize it as. Who's he following? He's following John Paul II. Who do you think taught Francis this stuff? Yeah. So if you condemn Francis for doing that, we'll go and condemn John Paul II for his 7 Assisi type meetings through his whole pontificate, and not from 1986 to 2002, 16 years. And in 16 years, he never once preached the gospel to any of the pagans that came to Assisi. Never once did he say to them, you know what? Buddhism is not going to get you anywhere. You can pray to your Buddhist God all you want, but it's not going to save your soul. And to the Hindu and the Zoroastrian and the African animists that he prayed with, and the Quran that he kissed, yeah, you can pray to them all you want, but they're not going to save your soul. Never once did he say that to them in the whole 16 years. Well, of course, if you already believe that they're saved and they're just part of the party, albeit a little further away, yeah, why preach the gospel to them? You see, this is the new evangelization. The whole liberal movement in Protestantism and Catholicism was about the fact that we're already saved, and we go out and preach to tell them that they're already saved, because Jesus came as the Redeemer. That's the new evangelization. That's why it's new. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to call it new. You see? So, yeah, now you put the pieces of the puzzle together, you begin to see how bad things really are. Okay, so let's go on to another one. We mentioned the homo pedophile scandal. Okay? Yeah. Do you see Pope Francis doing anything about that today? No. No. First words out of his mouth when he became Pope were, "Who am I to judge?" Well, you're the Pope. That's who you are. If there's anybody that should be judging, it's you. Okay? Well, where do you think he got that from? Well, what was John Paul II doing? Don't tell me he didn't know this was going on. And he was told, but he just ignored it. Because, well, that can't happen in my pontificate. Yeah. Okay. Or the banking scandal. My gosh, that's why they think that John Paul I got killed, or was murdered by his own prelature, because he was going to expose the banking scandal that had been going on for 2 decades. Wherein, Paul VI and the mafiosos were making deals and bringing a lot of money into the Vatican Bank and Banco with Ambrosiano. And wow, everybody was having a good old time. And what did John Paul II do? Well, he, the head honcho of that, Bishop Marcinkus, he exported to the United States so he could avoid prosecution by Italian authorities. And he was the head of the banking scandal. Okay. Did nothing about it. He just let things go on. I mentioned that he kissed the Quran. He got the red mark of the Shiva on his forehead. He prayed with African animists. So, and these are different times than Assisi. These are on his, his trips across the world, fraternizing with these pagan religions. Then he said hell's not a place, implying that hell doesn't exist. I'm not going to go so far as to say he didn't think hell existed, but he was very sketchy on this whole topic, as is who? Francis. Well, one of the first things Francis said was that hell doesn't exist, that men are going to be annihilated. Then we had the Lutheran Catholic dialogue organized by John Paul II, where we were going to iron out the different differences between the Lutherans and Catholics. And by the way, these are all the liberal branches of Catholicism and Lutheranism. The conservative branches of Lutheranism don't even want to talk to Catholics, okay, like the Missouri Synod. There's no way they're going to cut a deal with the Catholics about justification. These are all liberal Lutherans, the World Federation of Lutheranism, for example. And then all the liberal Catholics, not conservative Catholics. They would not be talking to the Lutherans. They know that the divide is very deep between the two faiths. But the liberals, you see, what we can do is, we water down everything. Love is important. Love and fellowship and all this stuff is most important. And we're willing to sacrifice the doctrine in order to get to that point, you see. This is the liberal fantasy land. Yeah, if we lived in heaven, yeah, they're the people to go to. But we don't. We live on a sin-cursed, sinful earth, where the devil's looking around every corner to see how he can deceive us. That's the real world. The liberals don't like to live in the real world. They live in the fantasy. They try to make up an ideal world, a utopian to live in. So they get together, and what happens? Well, the Catholic side begins to be diluted as the years go on of this Lutheran Catholic dialogue, until at one point in section 2C of the Annex, it says man is justified by faith alone. Signed by Cardinal Cassidy. Cardinal Ratzinger was so upset he didn't even go to the signing ceremony. So that's another thing. Pope Francis does the same thing. Yeah, dialogues with all kinds of different religions, and they're okay. And he said Luther was okay, and all the Protestant reform, they're okay. Just had a different idea, but they're okay. You see. Then we have the death penalty equivocation from John Paul II, wherein before, in our whole tradition, it was allowed, no questions asked. You commit a capital crime, you're going to get a capital punishment. Everybody agreed to that for 1900 plus years. Then all of a sudden, the liberal mentality, we can't take someone's life. It's so final. It's so this, so that. And so now it became only out of absolute necessity do we have the death penalty from John Paul II. And that just laid the plank open for Francis to walk down and just say, well, let's just do away with the whole thing. And he's either has already changed the catechism or is planning on changing it. Okay. So you see the same mentality between the two. And then the Old Covenant. Oh boy. The Old Covenant. So John Paul II in March 1981 makes a statement, the Old Covenant, never revoked by God. Now, he could have meant something very different than what it was interpreted to be by liberal Catholics, but they took his statement and they ran with it, just like they ran with some statements out of Vatican II that are a little ambiguous, but man, they put their liberal spin on them as quick as they could. Well, they did the same thing with John Paul II's, the Old Covenant, never revoked by God. And so the teaching came out in the USCCB, for example, the 1988 document on the liturgy, that the Mosaic covenant is still valid for the Jews. Wow. Yeah. Total, absolute change from traditional Catholic doctrine. Then I'm very familiar with all this because I had to fight my way through it. In 2006, the USCCB authorizes the United States Adult Catechism that on page 131 says the old covenant's not revoked. The Jews, the Mosaic covenant remains an eternal possession of the Jews. How about that? Yeah, blatant heresy in the catechism. And I did a lot of work to get that out of there, and they finally agreed to get it out of there. In the next edition, yeah, so they've already made 100,000 copies, and the next edition, I have yet to see that happen, but that's what they were claiming, that they were going to take out this, and we'll see. But that whole brouhaha started under John Paul II. You know, now, and to the point where, who was it, Cardinal Keeler from Baltimore wrote a paper with the Jews that said the Jews no longer need to be pursued with Christian salvation because they have their own covenant with God of all things. Total opposite of what Scripture teaches, what our tradition teaches, what our councils have taught, and all the popes before them. All under the tutelage and help of John Paul II. Then we had John Paul II apologizing for all the popes and cardinals of the past, you know, who didn't see the things that he saw. And, you know, we had to correct this all now, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. Yeah, there were some bad popes. I apologize for them myself, but it was like he was casting a shadow on all of Christian tradition before he came along to straighten all things out for us. And not only did he not straighten all things out for us, he had us worshiping false gods. He had us in the worst scandal we've ever had in the church, the homo-pedophile scandal. And among the other things that I mentioned. So something is drastically wrong here. And then the same thing that Pope Francis does today is John Paul II memorialized the reformers, Luther, Calvin. Yeah, they were okay people. They just, you know, made a few little mistakes here and there, but you know, they were good Christian people. Yeah. So not much wiggle room here. Okay. So where do we come out on this at the end? As a Catholic, you are required to obey the church when it makes a legal stipulation. And one of those legal stipulations is when it canonizes a saint. And so in the legal framework, yeah, we would have to say that in the structure that we now have in the Catholic Church, and it's never going to change, we can have a pope like Pope Francis, who we are suspect of from day one until now, canonize 3 popes in the worst period of church history, or one of the worst, with the most dubious biographies that we've ever seen of any popes, especially John Paul II and Paul VI. And if you know John the 23rd's history, the liberals that he used to hang around with, oh my. Okay, so and the church canonizes those 3 saints, or those 3 popes as saints. Yeah, in the legal sense, we accept it because we are required to. Okay, so my answer is, yeah, legally, John Paul II is a saint. Now, is that as further as we go? Well, no, because my whole thesis here has been there's the legal, then there's the real world. You see, the world where we really live and play and act and speak and do all the things that we do. In that world, the odds are that John Paul II is not a saint for all the reasons I mentioned. Okay. Especially since there's no devil's advocate to go into his life. The miracles that were chosen to promote him as a saint are dubious at best. His life, the whole mentality of the church today, and all the doctrinal aberrations we have between Francis, in the real world, no, he would never be a saint. In the legal world of Pope Francis, who now runs the church, yeah, John Paul II is a saint in that world. Okay. And I cannot say anything differently. I have no authority. I have a brain, however. Okay. And I can think things out. And I also know that the church, long before, and even now, today, will not let me go against my conscience. So in that sense, my conscience allows me to believe in the real world. Okay. And my conscience, on the one hand, will say, okay, because you're an authority, I'll accept what you say. I don't have to live it, though. Okay. Because it goes against my conscience. It goes against the real world that I see, that you're covering up. And someone may say, well, aren't canonizations infallible? No, they're not. Church has never said the canonizations are infallible. Never. You can go look at the Catholic Encyclopedia, even the old ones, and they will never say that. I looked through them thoroughly, believe me. Okay. Because if canonizations were infallible, I wouldn't be giving this talk tonight. Okay. But they're not. Now, someone may say, well, but that's the tradition of the church. Okay. Yeah, well, we've had that tradition as long as we've been obeying the rules and doing things properly, like, the devil's advocate, at least 3 legitimate miracles, and the whole reason why we make saints as exemplars, not just run-of-the-mill people. Yeah, all that used to be, that's tradition too, isn't it? And wasn't that the basis for canonizations? Well, you take all that away, what do you have? Well, you've just changed the definition of a saint. Okay? You've at least changed the criteria. And that entails in changing the whole understanding of what a saint is. Okay? So why weren't those things infallible? If the canonization in itself is infallible, why wasn't the process that gave us that infallible canonization infallible? Oh, I see. So we can change the nuts and bolts, but you want to keep the same structure. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So, yeah, you can defeat that argument rather easily. So canonizations are infallible, and that means we can have saints legally labeled as saints who may not be saints at all. Yes, that's certainly possible, especially when we consider the people involved. Pope Francis, the one being the canonizer here. All right, and let me just read a couple of catechetical statements on conscience. This comes from our 1994 Catechism, paragraph 782. It says, man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom, so as personally to make moral decisions. He must not be forced to act contrary to his conscience, nor must he be prevented from acting according to his conscience, especially in religious matters. Okay? That applies all the way around, not just in matters that deal with, other religions or things like that. Deals with being a Catholic. Okay? So I hope I've answered that. I know oh boy, we're at 9:10, and I took, an hour on that question, but I think it was well worth it. Okay. As you find here when you come to this show, I'm going to give you the ins and outs as deeply as I can, and then try to tie all the knots together and connect all the dots. But yeah, with that topic, I think it's very important. So, and anyway, we have at least 50